Hi, my name is Mark Walheimer. I'm working on a new book called Museum Visitor Experience, and I've put together a short presentation about how to create the overall museum visitor experience. Um, I'm often called by board members or people interested in starting a new museum, and their questions are often about museum feasibility. Uh, how much money do I need to raise? How much money will it cost to operate the museum? And my responses are often feasibility of what? Um, in order to right size and create the sustainable museum, you need to know what is the service the museum is providing. I believe that all museums are local. Even if you're creating a very large destination based museum, your staff will still be from the local community. You'll still be providing a service for the local community. And you need to think of the local population. So I often suggest that prior to a feasibility study, you need to think about your strategy. And I suggest that you start off with your museum market. What is the area, the local area that the museum will cover, and which are the visitor segments that you want to cover within that local community. I believe in the theory of change and that all nonprofits are about creating a change. That change is then communicated or um, messaged in a mission statement. So, what are your visitor segments? Then, what is the desired change that you want to create through this museum, a nonprofit? What is the call to action that you're trying to create within each of your visitor segments? You've gone out to the community, you've understood the needs of your community, and when I use the word community, I'm thinking now both of the local community and the larger, potentially worldwide community. How are you going to measure those visitor actions? And how are you going to evaluate and iterate those visitor actions and the desired change of the nonprofit museum? Um, the way the museum does that is through exhibits, public programming, educational outreach. At this point, I'm often asked, well, how am I going to pay for this? And my responses are often, you need to understand the change, the desired change that you want to create, the visitor call to action, then be able to go out into your local community and understand the funding capacity. Um, Often museums do this backwards. They look for how they're going to fund this, then afterwards decide what is the mission, and the visitor segments are decided then by the mission, often not well enough to define to create a change, and the mission is driven by the fundraising, or in other words, the stakeholders. So, first, strategy, feasibility. Now we're getting to tactics. So, the first slide is strategy, outward facing, front of house, what the public sees. We're now getting to back of house, how you create the tactics to create the desired change, the call to action, the measurable results within your strategy. And museum visits are divided by pre-visit, visit, post-visit. The point of all of this is to create, I believe, event-driven repeat visitation, that you're creating a constantly changing, event-driven and public programming-driven institution that's constantly changing and drawing people to your museum. So you have the strategy, then how you're going to say this. Sometimes I use the example of there's lots of different types of Italian restaurants, but they're all Italian restaurants. What is the voice of your strategy? What type of Italian restaurant are you creating? Is it a locals pizza shop, or is it a high-end fine dining establishment? What is the voice of that strategy? In terms of the pre-visit, what you're trying to do is you're trying to reach the innovators and the early adopters. This is thinking of startup museums. And the way you reach those people is through website, social media, and maybe smartphone applications prior to actually visiting the museum. You're going to be driving this through word of mouth and community involvement, both local community and worldwide community. Then you're driving people to the visit. The visit then is the facility, the staff, the events, the exhibits, the public programming. And you're trying to always do a call to action. What's going to drive people to return to the museum? And at that point, you're hopefully have created enthusiasts, people that are enthusiastic about the museum, and you're now getting to the early majority, late majority, because you've already captured the innovators and early adopters. You're driving people back to the website, social media, smartphone applications, and community outreach to keep this whole cycle going through event-driven repeat visitation. The tools to do all of this is the back of house, this is not public facing, are the planning, which is through the community umbrella concept. So beyond the voice, what's the look and the feel of the strategy, your market research, what are those segments, what are the audience groups looking for, what are their needs, how do you have empathy for those people, you create personas, audience segments, and then museum stakeholders. Stakeholder analysis includes the funding of the overall. I believe that all museums are part of placemaking, that museums don't exist in isolation. They exist within a context of place. So how is that strategy linked to the place, the location of the museum, the feasibility of the museum? How are you going to touch all of the potential visitors? Handshake is when you meet somebody new, you put out your hand, or at least in the United States, you put out your hand and you shake their hand. Is that a warm, friendly handshake? Is that a funny handshake? Is that a looking you in the eye handshake? How do you do that? It's a journey map. What's the visitor journey to your museum for each of the segments? The value proposition. If I visit your museum and become an enthusiast about your museum, how will I benefit? What will this do for me? Then implementation, testing, and evaluation. What is the content of each of these steps? The journey map, which is getting to specifics. I hope people will walk into the museum, they'll check their coat, they'll put down their book bag. It's point by point. What's the story of that journey? The bubble diagram is looking at the facility, the mood board, the look and the feel of each gallery or experience, audience research, museum stakeholder analysis. So this becomes part of a feedback loop of how you keep this going and iteration and changing this. This thinking is based on emotional design, design thinking, creating customer experiences, service design, the theory of change, placemaking, ethnography, that we define ourselves through the quantitative data of our lives. What brands do we purchase? What is our zip code? What are the online services that we use? What are the in-person services that we use? Lean design or lean startup is what is the minimum that you can do to accomplish all of your objectives. Systems thinking is thinking of the overall system of the museum, agile design, personalized learning, the decolonization of museums, user-centered design, user interface, and universal design. Sometimes people think that customer experience and user experience are the same thing. They're not. Customer experience is all of the touch points between the museum, the institution, and the user. The user experience is getting to either you're in front of the computer, you're walking into the museum. The customer experience is everything. The website, social media, the exterior of the building, the way people dress. User experience is you've gotten to the specific. It's one level down. The user interface is the interface between the individual, the user, and whatever that element is, the product, the service, or the experience that they're directly interacting with.